So this part on page 52 is some of his remarks on how one can immunize oneself from mass movements and how you might be able to prevent people from joining them. So he talks about minorities here. So he says, a minority is in a precarious position, however protected it be by law or force. The frustration engendered by the unavoidable sense of insecurity is less intense in a minority intent on preserving its identity than in one bent upon dissolving in and blending with the majority. A minority which preserves its identity is inevitably a compact whole which shelters the individual, gives him a sense of belonging, and immunizes him against frustration. On the other hand, in a minority bent on assimilation, the individual stands alone, pitted against prejudice and discrimination. He is also burdened with a sense of guilt, however vague, of a renegade. And then he gives a few examples. The Orthodox Jew is less frustrated than the emancipated Jew. The segregated Negro in the South is less frustrated than the non-segregated Negro in the North. So this is really interesting because it seems to also explain a lot of the social justice warrior movements that universities are dealing with today. You see a lot of minority groups, and it may be because these people are branched off of their family's culture. Asians, for example, you see a lot of, and this may be a way of them, this may be in action, a way of for them trying to knit together an identity, and they're doing it in these mass movements. They've come from other cultures, other traditions. They go away to school and go to university, and they're trying to become something, and they can't. I guess they're not fitting back together with their minority group. They're disaffected, and then they're creating their own mass movements. So I think it's interesting. At the same time, though, I wonder if Hoffer thinks that a person must necessarily join their cultural or historical or traditional group to then still feel like they belong. Is it not assimilation is just simply not possible for anyone that looks different or acts different in that group? Because if that was true, then we'd all be balkanized forever. That would be the most stable society in which minority groups must exist and must maintain their cultures. But I'm hoping that's not the case because that doesn't seem to be the most peaceful solution. I guess it's more of a question of what does the individual represent and what should he represent? Does a person, and I guess it relates to a few audio clips before this when I talked about Aboriginals. Must a person represent their group? Do they have to be typecasted that way? And is the typecast from others or is it from themselves? Because I think that's also a fundamental question. It may be that people think they have to play a role, right? Or a certain racial group, I have to play a role of that versus and what's interesting is that often it's perpetuated because then when you're a part of a certain group, let's say you're a black man, you're expected to speak for your minority group, which is hilarious. I've never seen a white person asked to speak for all of white people. Like that's ridiculous, right? So why would that make sense for a minority group? There's millions of them, and yet one person is supposed to speak for all of them. Like it's ridiculous. So in many ways, the prejudice in society perpetuates some of this stuff too. That certain minority groups, even if you're like a member of the NAACP, apparently Al Sharpton speaks for black people. And then what's funny is that you then hear about Clarence Thomas, who is a black Supreme Court justice, and I was watching a clip with Bill Maher in it, who's a comedian, and I remember Maher saying that, well, 99% of black people, he doesn't represent 99% of black people. I was thinking like, you've got to be kidding me. So you have to toe the line. We expect minority groups to toe the line on certain issues. Like no wonder this stuff gets racialized, and no wonder that race relations in the States have never been worse. So anyways, it's a question of human psychology and a question of whether people need to feel that they are either representing their group or can they individualize themselves and make their own goals and try to ignore or transcend other people's expectations on them. And that would, I guess, would be the goal. So what I'm suggesting is that individuals in minority groups, deserve to have their own opinion. We cannot say that the black group has a certain political view, that homosexuals as a group all have one political view. They don't. They are individuals and they have different points of view. Plenty of black people like Thomas Sowell, like Clarence Thomas. Plenty of homosexuals like Milo Yiannopoulos, right? So we have to get rid of this idea that minority groups should have a monoculture, even though Eric Hoffer apparently believes that the stability of those people must be found in those minority groups.